My life on the night shift at Denver International Airport. There are strange rules to follow. Creepypasta. When the sun goes down and the last passengers clear security, a whole different world comes to life inside Denver International Airport. Most people only see the bright lights and crowded terminals during the day. But at night, that's when the real stories unfold. From eerie, empty hallways to bizarre late-night encounters, working the night shift here isn't just a job. It's an experience. Some nights are peaceful, others are straight out of a mystery novel. And then there are the nights I'll never forget. Welcome to my life on the night shift at Denver International Airport. This is DTC, the place of the brave. Let's get started. If you're enjoying this glimpse into my night shift life at Denver International Airport, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this video reach more people. And if you love stories about the unseen side of places we think we know, subscribe to DTC, the place of the brave, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. There's a lot more coming your way. I took the night shift job at Denver International Airport, thinking it would be an easy gig. A simple routine, few travelers at night, a couple of patrols here and there, and a lot of waiting for the shift to end. Seemed like the perfect job for someone who preferred quiet over chaos. On my first night, I stepped into the employee break room, a small, dimly lit space with a few plastic chairs, an old wooden table, and a vending machine humming in the corner. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and fast food. Sitting in the corner was an older man, probably in his 50s, quietly eating a burrito. His salt and pepper hair and weathered face gave him a look of someone who had spent his life doing hard labor. His dark blue airport uniform looked worn and faded, but something about him told me he had been here for a long time. I cleared my throat and greeted him. "Hey, I'm Jack, new guy." The man chewed slowly, watching me for a moment before setting his burrito down. "Ryan," he said, his voice rough and low. "No warm welcome, no small talk, just that one word." I hesitated, unsure how to continue. I pulled out a chair and sat down, about to ask something about the job, when Ryan slid an old, leather-bound notebook across the table toward me. The cover was scuffed and worn, the title scrawled across it in bold red marker, "Night Shift Rules, Read or Die." I let out a small chuckle, trying to play it off. "You're joking, right?" Ryan didn't laugh. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Something about his silence made my stomach tighten. Slowly, I picked up the notebook, feeling the rough texture of the cover beneath my fingers. A strange unease crept over me. I glanced at Ryan again, but he had already turned back to his burrito as if nothing had happened. I opened the notebook. The first page had only one sentence written in careful, deliberate handwriting: "Follow every rule. Don't ask questions." Suddenly, this job didn't feel so easy anymore. I flipped through the pages of the notebook, my fingers brushing against the rough, yellowed paper. The words inside were written in a neat, precise script, as if someone had taken great care in recording them. My stomach churned as I read the title of the first section, "Night Shift Rules, Memorize or Regret." Beneath it, a list of rules, each more unsettling than the last. If you hear footsteps behind you in Concourse B between 2 and 3 a.m., do not turn around. Keep walking. Do not run. Do not stop. If a flight arrives that is not on the schedule, do not open the doors. Do not acknowledge it. If someone knocks, ignore it. Do not speak to the man in the brown suit. If he speaks to you, do not respond. If he approaches, leave immediately. If you see your own reflection in a window or mirror and it does not blink when you do, leave the area immediately. Do not look back. Do not hesitate. If an employee who was reported missing returns, do not let them in. No matter how much they plead, they are not who they claim to be. If you hear a second announcement of Code 6, do not react, do not move, do not acknowledge it in any way. Wait until the next scheduled announcement before resuming normal activity. I felt my pulse quicken as my eyes moved down the list. My first instinct was to scoff. This had to be some kind of hazing ritual for new employees, a way to mess with the rookies. But something about the way the words were written, the way Ryan had slid the notebook toward me without a hint of humor, made me uneasy. I glanced up at him. He was still eating his burrito, unfazed, as if he hadn't just handed me what looked like a survival guide for the night shift from hell. "This is a joke, right?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Ryan didn't look at me. "Follow the rules," he said simply. "Or don't. Up to you." His tone was flat, emotionless, not a warning, not a threat, just a statement of fact. I swallowed, looking back at the notebook. My mind fought against the absurdity of it all. Don't turn around if you hear footsteps. Don't talk to a man in a brown suit. Ignore a flight that isn't on the schedule. This was insane, and yet a knot of unease coiled in my stomach. I hesitated before pressing further. "Have you seen anything?" I asked. Ryan sighed as if he had been waiting for that question. He finally looked at me, his eyes dark and tired. "Everyone does. Eventually." I felt my mouth go dry. "Like what?" Ryan took his time finishing his bite of food before answering. "First week, you'll think you're imagining things. You'll hear footsteps in empty hallways, see movement in the reflection of a window, but nothing when you turn to check. You'll hear a plane landing that isn't supposed to be here, and you'll wonder if you just misread the schedule." He leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. "By the second week, if you're still here, you'll start to understand. The rules aren't random. They exist because this place isn't normal." A chill ran down my spine. The way he spoke, it wasn't like he was trying to scare me. He wasn't enjoying this. He was just stating facts. I looked at the rules again, my mind racing. Some of them I could explain away. Hallucinations from exhaustion, paranoia from working a lonely night shift. But others, I wasn't so sure. I pointed at the fifth rule. "Employees who went missing, that's happened before?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table to me. I hesitated before unfolding it. It was an old memo from airport security, a missing person report. The name and face of a man who had apparently vanished during his shift. His uniform was identical to mine. I felt cold. Ryan tapped the paper with a calloused finger. "His shift was the same as yours." I didn't know what to say. My fingers tightened around the notebook. "This is insane," I muttered under my breath. Ryan shrugged. "Believe what you want." He stood up, tossing the last of his burrito wrapper into the trash. "Just don't break the rules." He walked out of the break room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I looked back down at the list. My rational mind told me this was all an elaborate prank, some twisted way to scare the new guy, but deep in my gut, something told me otherwise. I closed the notebook, shoving it into my bag. My shift had barely started, and already I was questioning whether I had made the right choice by taking this job. And then, from somewhere deep within the empty concourse, I heard footsteps coming from behind me, exactly at 2:17 a.m. The footsteps started at exactly 2:17 a.m. I was making my usual patrol through Concourse B, my footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. The airport was eerily silent, save for the occasional hum of vending machines and the distant murmur of an intercom announcement that didn't quite reach my ears. At first I thought I had imagined it, the soft, rhythmic sound of footsteps behind me. I slowed my pace. The footsteps slowed too. I stopped. So did they. A cold chill ran down my spine. My grip tightened on the flashlight in my hand as my mind raced back to the notebook. If you hear footsteps behind you in Concourse B between 2 and 3 a.m., do not turn around. Keep walking. Do not run. Do not stop. Every instinct screamed at me to glance over my shoulder, just a quick look to prove to myself that I was alone. But something deeper, something primal, kept me frozen in place. My breath came in shallow, controlled exhales as I forced myself to move forward. One step, the footsteps resumed. Another step. They matched my pace perfectly. I clenched my jaw and kept walking, my heart hammering in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a side hallway that led to the break room. The second I turned the corner, the footsteps stopped. I stood there, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. Slowly, I let out a shaky breath. Maybe it had been my imagination. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But as I took one last look down the empty concourse, something inside me whispered, "You weren't imagining it." I tried to shake off the unease as I returned to my routine. I busied myself with checking the security logs, making sure all the doors were locked, anything to distract myself from the phantom footsteps that had followed me. Then, at around 2:45 a.m., the radio crackled to life. Inbound flight 191 preparing for arrival. I frowned. That didn't make sense. There were no scheduled arrivals at this hour. I reached for the schedule printout on the desk, scanning it quickly. Flight 191 wasn't on the list. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should call it in. But before I could reach for the radio, the low, distant rumble of an approaching plane filled the air. I rushed to one of the large terminal windows. Through the glass, I saw a plane descending toward the runway. Its exterior was dull, almost faded, as if it had been sitting abandoned for decades. A strange static filled the air, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. Then the intercom crackled again, but this time the voice wasn't from the control tower. It was deeper, distorted, wrong. "Mike, we've been waiting for you." My blood turned to ice. The voice had come from inside the plane. I stumbled back from the window, my breath shallow. I turned and sprinted down the corridor, nearly colliding with Ryan, who grabbed my arm before I could barrel past him. "Don't go near it." His voice was sharp, urgent. "What the hell is that?" I gasped. Ryan's expression was grim. "You don't want to know." I looked past him, out toward the runway. The plane just sat there, motionless, its engines silent. No passengers disembarked, no crew appeared, and yet I could feel something watching, waiting. Ryan tightened his grip on my arm. "Come on, we're leaving." I didn't argue. As we moved away from the windows, a deep, unnatural knocking sound echoed through the terminal. Slow, rhythmic, coming from the glass doors that led to the jet bridge. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew somehow that if I did, I wouldn't be able to look away. I didn't stop running until I was back in the break room. My lungs burned and my pulse hammered in my ears. Ryan had let go of my arm once we were out of sight of the mysterious flight, but he didn't say anything. He just walked beside me, silent, his expression unreadable. I slammed the door behind us and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. The room was exactly as we had left it, dimly lit, stale smelling, the vending machine humming in the corner. And Bill was still there. He was standing by the counter, stirring a cup of instant coffee, completely unfazed. "Jesus, kid, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said without looking up. I wanted to tell him about Flight 191, about the voice from the plane, about the knocking on the glass. But before I could say anything, my eyes caught something in the room's small rectangular mirror, hanging on the opposite wall. Bill's reflection wasn't moving. My breath hitched. He was stirring his coffee, bringing it up to his lips in real life. But in the mirror, his reflection just stood there, motionless, staring straight at me. And then it smiled, not a normal smile, a grin wide and unnatural, stretching too far across his face, revealing too many teeth, sharp, gleaming, and wrong. I felt ice creep into my veins. The notebook flashed in my mind. If you see your own reflection and it does not blink, leave immediately. I took a slow, careful step back. Bill must have noticed my expression because he followed my gaze to the mirror. The moment he saw it, he let out a long, weary sigh. "Shit," he muttered. "Guess that means I've got about 10 minutes. I stared at him. "What?" Bill took another sip of coffee, his real self, not the reflection, then set the cup down and turned to face me. "You should probably go," he said, far too calm for what was happening. I swallowed hard. "What does that mean? What's happening to you?" Bill rubbed the back of his neck as if debating how much to tell me. "Let's just say, when your reflection stops doing what it's supposed to, your time's about up." He gave me a small, tired smile. "And I mean really up." I felt my stomach drop. I turned back to the mirror. The reflection of Bill was still standing there, still grinning. But now the grin was wider, and its head, it was tilting slowly, inch by inch, as if testing the limits of how far it could go. I took another step back. The lights flickered, and then over the airport intercom, a sound I'd hoped I'd never hear. A voice, cold and distant, announced, "Code 6. My heart stopped. The notebook's rules came rushing back. If you hear a second announcement of Code 6, do not react, do not move, do not acknowledge it in any way. I stood there frozen, willing myself to stay still. And then the door to the break room creaked open. A man stepped inside. I knew instantly who he was. He wore a brown suit, pressed, pristine, completely out of place in an airport at this hour. He had neatly combed hair, slicked back like he had walked straight out of the 1950s. But his eyes were too dark, too empty. He smiled at me, a perfect, polite, artificial smile. I couldn't move. Bill's voice came low, steady. "Don't answer him if he asks about the gate." The man took another step inside, adjusting his cufflinks. Well, he said smoothly. A new face. His voice was velvety, charming, too charming. "I have a question for you, my friend," he continued, tilting his head just slightly. I felt sick. Bill's fingers twitched. His reflection was still grinning at me from the mirror. The man in the brown suit smiled wider. "Can you tell me," he asked, voice syrupy sweet, "which gate I should take?" The room seemed to contract around me. My throat felt dry. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at him, my mind repeating one thing over and over again. "Don't answer." His smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his expression. He took a slow step toward me. Bill moved, stepping between us. "Not tonight," he said firmly. For a long moment there was silence. Then the man in the brown suit exhaled, shaking his head as if mildly disappointed. "Another time then," he said. And with that he turned and strolled out of the room, as if nothing had happened. The second the door closed behind him, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The mirror shattered. I jumped, heart pounding. Bill stared at the broken shards on the floor. His reflection was gone. He turned to me, his face unreadable. "Clock's ticking, kid," he muttered. "You better start learning the rules." The silence in the break room stretched on after the mirror shattered. I stood there, my breath still unsteady, my skin cold with lingering fear. Bill didn't move for a long time, just staring down at the shards of broken glass on the floor. Finally, he exhaled. "Well," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "That was fun." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What was that?" Bill shot me a look, one that said, "You don't want to know." Before he could answer, the sound of knuckles rapping against the door made us both freeze. 3 steady knocks, then a voice, light, familiar, too normal for everything that had just happened. "Hey guys, open up, it's me, Karen." A shiver ran down my spine. Karen, I didn't know her personally, but I'd heard her name before. She had worked the night shift here before I started. Then, one night, about a month ago, she stopped showing up. Management had quietly removed her name from the schedule, and no one talked about it, because she was missing. Bill's entire body went rigid. His eyes darted to me, sharp and urgent, and he lifted a finger to his lips. Don't move. I held my breath. Another knock. Guys? The voice was softer now, confused. Why aren't you opening the door? My stomach twisted. It sounded just like her. A little tired, a little irritated, but there was something off. Something in the way her words stretched just a little too long, like she wasn't used to forming them anymore. I took an instinctive step toward the door, but Bill's hand shot out, gripping my arm in a vice-like hold. He shook his head once. Don't. Outside, Karen's voice wavered. Bill, it's so cold out here. A slow scraping sound joined the knocking, fingernails dragging against the door. It's so dark. My blood ran cold. The notebook. If an employee who was reported missing returns, do not let them in. No matter how much they plead, they are not who they claim to be. I forced myself to step back. Bill, still holding my arm, reached into his pocket with his free hand. He pulled out a small, worn object, an old pocket-sized Bible, its cover cracked with age. Without hesitation, he pressed it flat against the door. The effect was immediate. Karen's voice twisted, warping into something inhuman, something broken. The knocking became frantic, desperate. Please, please let me in. It's so dark. I don't know where I am. A sharp, ragged gasp, then a scream, high, shrill, filled with something beyond pain. The kind of scream that makes your bones feel like they might shatter from the sound alone. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to react, not to run. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the screaming stopped. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something unseen. A beat of silence, then a whisper, right against the door. See you soon. And then, nothing. The weight in the air lifted, leaving only an eerie, ringing quiet. Bill let out a slow breath, stepping back and tucking the Bible away. I stared at him, my heart still racing. What the hell was that? I whispered. He turned to me, his expression grim. That, he said, was not Karen. I swallowed, glancing at the door like it might suddenly burst open. Bill ran a hand through his graying hair, looking more exhausted than ever. She went missing about a month ago. We all knew she wasn't coming back. Not really. He met my gaze. But they like to pretend. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't just a haunted airport. This wasn't just a set of strange rules to follow. There was something here, something watching, waiting, playing with us, and it knew our names. I thought about the reflection that had smiled at me. The voice from the plane that had said it was waiting for me. I had a sinking feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't done with me yet. I sat in the break room, staring at the door where Karen, or whatever had been pretending to be Karen, had just been. My mind was still struggling to process what had just happened. The way her voice had shifted, the way she had screamed, the way Bill had known exactly what to do, as if he'd done it before. The air still felt heavy, like the echoes of whatever had been out there hadn't fully faded. Then Bill exhaled, not a sigh of relief, a sigh of resignation. It's time for me to go, he said. I turned to him, confused. Go? Go where? Bill gave me a small, tired smile, the kind of smile you give when you've known something was coming for a long time. My shift's over. I shook my head. What? No, it's not. But before I could finish, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his employee ID. Without another word, he pressed it into my palm. I stared down at it. It was warm from his hand. What? Look after yourself, kid. He turned, walking toward the door. I shot up from my chair. Bill, wait. But he didn't stop. He walked through the terminal with a steady, deliberate pace, heading toward Gate 32. I followed him. I wasn't sure why. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. Maybe because some part of me knew where he was going, and I needed to see it for myself. By the time I reached Gate 32, my stomach was a tight knot. The plane was waiting. Flight 191. It was still sitting there, engine silent, doors open. The same faded, weathered fuselage. The same eerie presence that made my skin crawl. Bill didn't hesitate. He walked straight up the jet bridge, onto the plane, and disappeared inside. I opened my mouth to call after him, but before I could, the doors hissed shut. And just like that, he was gone. For a long moment, nothing happened. The plane didn't taxi. It didn't take off. It just sat there, still and waiting. Then, overhead, the intercom crackled to life. A voice, cold, detached, artificial, spoke. "Bill has departed the airport. Welcome, new night shift supervisor." The blood in my veins went ice cold. I looked down at the ID still clutched in my hand. It no longer had Bill's name on it. It had mine. My breath hitched. My fingers tightened around the plastic. Then, before I could react, a slow, measured clap sounded behind me. I turned. The man in the brown suit was standing there. He was exactly the same as before. Same perfectly pressed suit, same slick back hair, same polite, too perfect smile. Only this time I could feel something in the air around him, something watching, something waiting. He tilted his head slightly. "Well, Mike," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "Now that you're in charge, I think it's time you answer my question." I felt my pulse in my throat. "Where," he asked, taking a single step closer, "is the gate?" I said nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The rules were clear. Do not answer him if he asks about the gate. For a moment, the man just watched me. His polite smile didn't falter, but I could feel something shifting beneath it, like a predator watching its prey, waiting for a single wrong move. Then movement caught my eye. I turned my head, just slightly, toward the window beside me. And my heart stopped, my reflection. It wasn't standing still, it was moving. Slowly, subtly. My reflected self's head was tilting to the side, ever so slightly. I wasn't tilting my head, it blinked. I didn't. My stomach dropped. The man in the brown suit's smile widened, just a fraction. He had seen it too. "Well now," he murmured. "That's interesting." I didn't know what to do. I kept my lips pressed tightly shut, kept my body perfectly still, willing my reflection to stop, wishing, praying that whatever had happened to Bill wouldn't happen to me. The man let out a soft chuckle. "No answer, that's a shame." He turned slightly, adjusting his cufflinks as if nothing unusual had happened. "Don't worry," he said casually. "I can wait." And then he was gone. He didn't walk away. He didn't disappear in a flash of light. He was just gone, like he had never been there at all. But my reflection, it was still smiling. I couldn't stay in the break room, not after what had just happened. The air in the airport felt wrong, like reality was stretching thin around me. The mural, the janitor, my own reflection moving when I didn't. None of it made sense, but I was done trying to make sense of it. I needed answers. I needed to find Bill. If there was any chance that he was still here, if that plane hadn't really taken him, I had to know. I made my way toward the elevators, my fingers clenched around the ID badge he had given me. The halls were deathly silent, the fluorescent lights above flickering in and out of sync. It felt like I was being watched, like something unseen was moving just outside my field of vision. I reached the elevator and pressed the button for B1, the lowest basement level that I knew existed. The maintenance storage was there, and if Bill was anywhere underground, it was the best place to start. The doors slid open, and I stepped inside. The moment they closed, I felt it, a shift, a lurch, too heavy, like the elevator was dropping faster than it should. Then, B6, gate. My stomach twisted. That wasn't supposed to be an option. The doors slid open, and the air was wrong. It was damp, cold, heavy with something I couldn't name. The overhead lights were dim and buzzing, casting sickly yellow pools onto the concrete floor. The walls were lined with old, rusted pipes, and the air smelled of mold, metal, and something else, something sour like decaying flesh. And then I saw it, a mass of flesh, writhing and shifting in the dim light, pulsating like a living, breathing tumor. It was massive, stretching from floor to ceiling, a grotesque, towering thing made of melted faces. Faces that were still alive. Some were screaming, their mouths locked open in silent, endless agony. Others wept, their eyes darting back and forth in panic. And then I saw him, Bill. His face was among them, his features twisted in pain, his eyes bloodshot and wild as he moved his mouth, no sound escaping his lips. My radio crackled to life. Bill's voice, weak but desperate, came through. "Mike, don't let it touch you." The thing moved. A sick, wet squelch filled the air as it shifted, dragging itself forward, the faces wailing louder in unison. I ran. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I just turned and ran as fast as I could, my boots pounding against the grimy concrete floor. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and endless, the stench of rot filling my lungs as the sound of shifting flesh slithered behind me. Then, a door. I didn't question it. I threw myself against it, nearly stumbling inside as it slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my chest heaving. The room was small, cluttered with old maintenance equipment, dust-covered tools, rusted metal shelves. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the man sitting against the far wall. He was in an old airport uniform, one I didn't recognize, stained and torn from decades of wear. His hair was disheveled, his beard thick and unkempt, his eyes sunken and weary. He stared at me for a long moment before exhaling. "Well," he muttered, "took you long enough." I blinked. "What?" The man, Hank, his ID tag barely legible beneath the grime, shook his head. "You're not the first one to end up down here," he said, his voice hoarse like he hadn't spoken in years. "And you sure as hell won't be the last." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" Hank let out a bitter chuckle. "Used to work here, janitor, got stuck in 97. My stomach twisted. "You've been down here since..." He nodded. "Guess management kind of forgot about me." His eyes darkened. Or maybe they just didn't care. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "What is this place?" I asked. "This basement, that thing out there." Hank's expression grew grim. "This ain't an airport, kid." My breath hitched. "What? This place?" He gestured around us. "It's a prison." My blood turned to ice. Hank leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "It doesn't keep people out, Mike." His eyes locked onto mine. "It keeps them in." A cold, hollow silence stretched between us. I felt dizzy, like the world around me was unraveling. "That thing out there," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "The faces, Bill..." Hank's jaw tightened. "They're the ones who didn't leave." Something thudded against the door behind me, slow, deliberate, and then a voice, smooth, familiar. "Mike." I went rigid. The man in the brown suit, he was right outside. "Open the door." I clenched my fists, stepping back, shaking my head. Hank's eyes widened. "Don't! Move!" Another knock, gentle, patient. "Mike, I know you're in there." My pulse pounded against my skull. I could feel it again, that shifting in the air, that unnatural pull toward something I shouldn't acknowledge. "Mike." His voice slithered through the cracks in the door, curling into my ears like smoke. "Where is the gate?" Hank grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard. His eyes locked onto mine, his grip unyielding. "Don't answer." I didn't. I stood there, heart hammering, hands shaking as the knocking stopped. The silence stretched on. Then a laugh, low, quiet, amused. And then, just as suddenly as he had come, he was gone. For now. Hank and I didn't hesitate. We ran. The hallway behind us groaned like something alive, the air thick with an unnatural pressure that made it hard to breathe. I didn't dare look back. I could still hear the wet, slithering movements of the thing we had escaped, the whispering echoes of the man in the brown suit curling around the edges of my mind. The only way out was up. We found a stairwell, its metal door rusted at the edges, the overhead bulb flickering erratically. Hank shoved it open and we barreled inside, feet pounding against the concrete steps. The whole building shuddered. The stairwell walls twisted, bending like melting wax. The steps beneath my feet felt wrong. For a second, I thought I was running down instead of up. I blinked and reality snapped back into place, but I wasn't sure how much longer it would hold. "Keep going," Hank shouted behind me. I didn't stop. We burst through the door at the top, stumbling into Concourse B, or at least what was left of it. The airport was glitching. The floor stretched and rippled like water. The ceiling warped, growing impossibly tall one second, then crushingly low the next. The digital screens flickered, displaying nonsense symbols instead of flight information. And the passengers, no, not passengers, things pretending to be passengers. They filled the concourse, glitching in and out of existence, bodies stuttering between frozen smiles and distorted, unnatural movements. Their eyes were empty, their faces almost human, but not quite right. I felt bile rise in my throat. "We're close!" Hank shouted. "Gate 32 is just ahead." I didn't know why we were heading there until I saw it. The plane, Flight 191, still sitting at the gate, waiting. And standing on the jet bridge, smiling at me, was Bill. But it wasn't the same Bill I had known. His uniform was clean, too clean. His face was too smooth, his eyes bright in a way that didn't belong to someone who had seen what he had seen. He grinned like he had been expecting me all along. "You made it, Mike." My whole body went cold. Inside the plane, I saw them, more of me, dozens of them, sitting in the seats, standing in the aisles, all wearing my uniform, all staring at me. Some were smiling, some weren't. One of them, one with dead, hollow eyes, lifted a hand and beckoned me forward. The plane doors stood open. The invitation was clear. I took a step back. "Mike," Bill said, still smiling, still too perfect. "It's time to board." I couldn't breathe. The plane wasn't just a plane. It was a trap. Hank grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "If you step on that jet bridge," he growled, "you'll never come back." I looked at him, then at Bill, then at all the copies of myself waiting inside the plane, and I did the only thing I could. I ran. I didn't get far. The airport warped around me, the walls stretched, the floor tilted, and the air itself seemed to pull me backward. No matter how fast I ran, I wasn't running away. I was running deeper. And then he was there, the man in the brown suit, standing just ahead, waiting for me like he had always known I would come. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted. He adjusted his cufflinks with a practiced ease, as if we were just two businessmen discussing mundane matters over coffee. But his smile was sharper now. I skidded to a stop, my chest heaving. He tilted his head slightly. "Well, Mike," his voice was smooth, patient. "You've seen behind the curtain now." I shook my head, my pulse hammering. "I don't want to be part of this." His smile widened. "Oh, but you already are." The air around me shuddered, folding in on itself. My stomach dropped, not in fear, but in a very real, physical sensation. Like gravity had suddenly betrayed me. I was falling. The concourse, the flickering screens, the warped mural, everything stretched away into a spiraling, endless void. Images flickered past me in chaotic flashes. Faces in the gate screaming silently. The mural, shifting, changing. Karen's reflection, her teeth too sharp. Bill, trapped, his eyes pleading. Hank, sitting alone in the dark. I saw myself, dozens of versions, hundreds, 1,000 different mics all staring back. The man in the brown suit's voice followed me down into the abyss. You can't leave, Mike. You belong here. The world collapsed, and then I woke up. I sucked in a sharp breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands trembled, gripping something solid, an ID badge. I looked down. It wasn't mine. It was Bill's. I was in the break room. The vending machine hummed. The old coffee pot dripped. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was exactly the same as the first night I had stepped into this room. Like nothing had ever happened. Like everything had happened. I barely had time to process it before the door swung open. A new guy. Young, fresh-faced. Me, months ago. He stepped inside, hesitating when he saw me. Hey, he said, uncertain. I'm Caleb. I just started tonight. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, looked at who I had been. The loop had started again. Slowly, I pushed the notebook across the table toward him. Read it. He frowned, eyeing the worn cover. Why? I popped open a can of Mountain Dew, taking a slow sip before sighing. Because I don't feel like explaining this shit twice. Caleb hesitated, but curiosity won. He picked up the notebook, flipping it open. His brow furrowed as he read the first page. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I stood, stretching, feeling exhaustion settle into my bones. As I walked out of the break room, my eyes flickered toward the mural. It had changed again. Hank was there now. His face wasn't screaming like Bill's had been. He just looked tired. Beneath his image, a new line of text had appeared. You are next. I exhaled slowly. Then the intercom crackled. A voice, calm, smooth, familiar, echoed overhead. Mike, where is the gate? I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn around. I already knew the rules.